This is the Mekanicast, and I'm talking in English because virtually opposite to me is sitting none other than Matthew Rosenberg. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, how's it going?
It's fine. How are you?
I'm excellent. I'm excellent.
For those who don't know you, but they probably read lots of books by you, you're mainly known for lots of titles at Marvel and at DC. Starting at Marvel, you were the guy who put Punisher into a War Machine suit.
Yes.
You were the guy who did the Thunderbolts during the King in Black era.
Hmm.
You are the guy who also did a Joker puzzle box comic,
Yes.
and you are the guy who did the Suicide Squad, but even worse than the Suicide Squad with Task Force C, if I'm correct.
Yes. That is correct. All of that is correct.
All right, before we jump into why we're here, for those who haven't read the caption, probably that's the what's the furthest place from here. Before we do that, I just before you a few hours ago, I was talking to Zach Kaplan,
Oh, great.
and he's famous for doing sci-fi.
Mhm.
Are you is Can you say that superhero is your go-to genre?
No, I don't think so. I grew up loving superhero comics and
Okay.
I really do love them, but I kind of like to do everything. I kind
Yeah.
of I leave it to the readers to decide if I'm better at certain things than others, but I love superhero comics and always have, but I really like making crime comics and fantasy and sci-fi and horror and just anything I can do. It's
Okay.
fun. That's the joy of comics.
All right. To put it all into perspective, how old are you?
I am 42.
All right. So we're practically from the same era. I'm turning 40 this year.
Oh.
So have you been doing it all your did you always have you known that you were going to be a writer? Is that something you had as a career? Um,
No, no, no. I've loved comics my whole life. I
yeah.
actually, when I grew up in New York City, and there was a comic book shop on my block when I grew up. So the first place I could ever go on my own was a comic shop, and comics have always been with me. But I never thought about making them. I can't draw, which was a big setback, obviously. And but both of my parents are writers. They were writers for
Okay.
professionally, and so I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew I didn't want to be a writer because I knew that was a hard job. So I worked in the music industry for a long time,
Okay.
and that's what I did. And I hit a point where the music industry was really hard and difficult, and I was like, I just want to do something else with my life. And the only thing I liked as much as music was comics. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to try and make comics. But I was an adult. I meet a
Yeah.
lot of comic creators who are like, started when I was 12, and I was like, no, I started when I was 30 something.
Yeah, but that's that. Well, I'm comparing you because I just had the other talk. For Zach, it was the same about the age of 30. For me too, I took over this shop. Yeah,
Mhm.
there's the virtual background. I took it over when I turned 30. So it's actually a
Yeah.
career switch that's yeah, it's you have to be confident about it or something, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a I don't know what my life would be like if I tried to make comics when I was 20 or 21. I think it would I probably I have no idea. I don't it's a very different thing to think about, but
Yeah.
I'm happy I came into it as an adult with experience of like having a career and having a job that was good at and could do other things and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. And I think probably also experience, yeah, experience, life experience, not per se experience in working, but I think when you, when you're 30, you have more ideas than when you're 20. When you're 20, you have your look on life or on the world is totally different, I suppose.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I hope that a big thing for me is like I spend so much time writing, but I try and make sure to go live and do things so that I have more to draw on in 10 years and more because yeah, the everything you do in your life impacts, the writing and the work you create. So it's important to keep feeding that always. And
Yeah.
I feel very, yeah. I don't know what I would have written at 20, but I know I probably would look back on now and be embarrassed by it.
At DC, you're writing the Joker.
Yes.
And with the Joker, I also when they started the series, you weren't the writer. You started the second arc, I think. When we heard about it in the shop, there were lots of customers who were saying like, yeah, it's we don't. It's really weird to have a character like the Joker having its own series. Isn't that hard
Yeah.
to create stories for him?
It is. I mean, it's good for the customers in your shop for picking up on that, because it
Yeah,
is.
they're critical. Customers are always critical.
I meet a lot of readers who are like, well, of course the Joker should have a book, but it is very complicated because the Joker is a villain, and not just a regular villain, but he's so mysterious. And so
Yeah, there we go.
there's a lot of things that you can't explain about him. There's a lot of things that have to be left unanswered. And so he's a hard character to write in that way. I took over the book. I mean, we got a new #1, but it's sort of
Yeah,
spiritually the same thing. But James Tynan was writing it, and I wrote some of the issues with James in his run.
yeah,
Me and Francesco Francavilla did 3 issues.
yeah,
Um, but we the the fun thing that we were doing, like, James had a great take on the character, which is that it's a Joker book, but actually it's about Commissioner Gordon, and
yeah.
he is the character you follow.
There
And
we go.
I knew I had to do something like that, because if you spend all your time with the Joker, he's not scary anymore. He's not mysterious. If you spend so much time with him, you understand him. If you watched Halloween and you spend all your time with Michael Myers, or you watch Nightmare on Elm Street and spend all your time with Freddy Krueger, they're not scary anymore. They're just characters. And
Yeah,
so on our series, my idea was that there are 2 Jokers. And so you're following a person who's hunting the Joker, but it's also the Joker. And who are they and how are they related is sort of the mystery that drives the book.
yeah. Now, on the other hand, we're currently there's Night Terrors coming out.
Mhm.
You did the Joker part.
It did.
I assume you had fun with that because that's a really, yeah. The second one came out yesterday or
Yes.
today. I haven't read it yet, but the first part of that two-parter was really funny, just because you
Oh,
see him in a day-to-day basis or something. I don't know how to put it in words.
yeah.
Yeah, he works in a
Uh,
cubicle and all that.
Yeah, he the Night Terrors event is very funny because they DC came to all the writers and said it's the character's worst nightmares. And there was we had a big group call, and all the writers were on there, and Josh Williamson was there, and G. Willow Wilson and Mark Waid, and all of us are on the call. And I just had a moment where I said, they said, we want it to be a horror book and it's about your character's worst nightmare. And I said, my book is already sort of a horror book. The Joker's kind of horrifying. And I said, and also, what is he going to have a nightmare about? He's the Joker. And they were like, that's up to you. And so I spent a couple days thinking about it, and I came back and I said, well, the Joker's biggest nightmare is probably having a boring life and being boring. And
Yeah,
so yeah, the book is really fun because in the opening of the book, he accidentally kills Batman, and then he doesn't know what to do with himself. He has no arch nemesis. He has no reason for living, and so he gets a job at an office, and he works in an office. He's working in the accounting department, and he's bored. And that's
yeah.
that's the scary thing of it. And that's yeah, it's been very fun to make. It's a nice digression, and so far the readers have been very enthusiastic about it, so that's very fun.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a certain meme that they took out of the animated Batman, the animated series, when they talk about the IRS, when a henchman tells the Joker about not paying taxes, and he says, "Are you crazy? That's the biggest villain of all. So we're paying taxes." That's
Yeah, yeah,
It's really funny to have those superheroes. Sometimes they say that in comics you can't put superheroes in a daily circumstances, but
yeah,
sometimes it really works well because it's so surrealistic for us then as readers, because we're
yeah,
used to them in those bombastic situations.
yeah. I feel like, superhero comics have been around for so long now, and have explored so much of what you can do with superheroes, that I'm always excited about the ideas that do something that's like a little different. And so the Joker has a day job is something that made me laugh, and I'm very happy that DC let us do it for 2 issues. It's not, I don't think it's a book I'd want to write for a long time, but it's
Yeah.
just 2 issues. Night Terrors is short. It's 2 issues, and then we're back to the main Joker book. So
All right. Awesome. Also something else that you did. I don't know what the circumstances were, but you did DC Vampires.
yes.
It was, if it's correctly, somebody told me it was because James Tynion gave the idea and you took off with it.
Yeah. So DC versus Vampires was a book that James was going to do when he finished on Batman. He was going to do Batman for a little while, and then he was like, well, I'm going to do DC versus Vampires. And that was his next book, and DC approved it. And then his Batman was a huge success, and he ended up staying on the book for a while, and they were like, okay, well, now it's time to do DC versus Vampires. And he was like, I don't have time. I can't do it. But they'd already approved it. And so me and James are very good friends. We've been friends for a decade, and we both live in New York and are just very close. And he said, well, what if Matt comes and does it? And I was just starting at DC, and so we had a call, and I was like, yeah, I would love to. It sounds great. And then they were like, oh, you said yes so easily. We didn't tell you Otto Schmidt's going to draw it. And I'd made a Hawkeye book at Marvel with Otto, and I love his work, and I love working with him. And so, yeah, I was just like, yeah, of course I wanted to do it before, and now I even want to do it even more. And so, yeah, me and Otto made the book. It's James's idea for a book, and then we made the whole series, and there's some spin-offs and stuff that we did.
Yeah, and I think that's also liberating from the continuity, because you can do stuff and you can go extremely in all directions without having to be bothered with everything else that's happening in the universe.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I am a huge superhero fan, so continuity is very fun for me. I love connecting to all these other stories and knowing what's going on, but it is always nice to be able to step away from it sometimes. And I know that some writers find continuity very daunting and very, very hard to keep up with, but I think that's the fun of superhero comics, is knowing what's going on. But yeah, it was great to just be like, very early on, I was on calls with Ben Abernathy, who's the editor on the book, and I would just be like, can we kill this character? And he just kept being like, you can do whatever you want. Like, there are no rules. And I was like, and it just took me a long time to be like, I guess we're gonna kill Batman. I guess we're gonna kill, I guess we're gonna do this. And yeah, it's very fun. It's very it's fun because it keeps the audience guessing. You go into a Batman comic and you're pretty sure Batman's going to survive, but in DC versus Vampires, anyone could die, anything could happen, and that's a fun thing to get to do.
Yeah, I can understand. You, next to all the superhero comics, you also do how can I put it? We call it indies, we call it alternative stories. I think is it for you? Sometimes probably superhero comic books are, to make them, they're quite stressful, I suppose, or there's always a deadline. Is this your leisure time, or you're stretching the mind a bit if you're doing something else?
It's a different kind of stress. It's a different it's not leisure time. I love making my own books and being able to do everything. It's like DC vs. Vampires. We can do whatever we want because it's our own book. And I made a few indie comics. I have a series called We Can Never Go Home that came out from Black Mask a few years ago, and a series called Four Kids Walk Into a Bank that I made at Black Mask with my friend Tyler Boss. And now we're making me and Tyler are making What's the Furthest Place from Here at Image. And no, I mean, it's not my leisure time in that, like, it's the thing I'm most proud of. I'm incredibly passionate about it. I love the books I make at DC. I love what I get to do at Marvel, but it is definitely the thing I want to do. But it is also a book that, you make it very different. You do it. It uses different muscles, and you're trying to do different things, and that's really fun. And sometimes it feels like a vacation a little bit.
Yeah, is it wrong to say that they are more grounded while the superhero comics are always bombastic and you have lots of superpowers and more action, while this is more serious.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I think more grounded is a good way to put it. I think we're telling stories that are a little more personal, a
Yeah,
little more sometimes a little more quiet, sometimes not, sometimes they're big and crazy and bombastic in their own ways, but yeah, I mean, it's stuff that when you make a comic like the Joker, you're trying to make a book that a lot of people will read, and obviously we want a lot of people to read What's the Furthest Place from Here, but our first job for me and Tyler is to make something that we want to make, that feels
yeah,
important to us
yeah,
and that we care about. And so, like, when I say it's my favorite thing to work on, like, that's the priority, is to make it my favorite book and the thing that means the most to me and the thing that means the most to Tyler when he draws it, so that when it connects with an audience, it's not, we're not trying to sell a book to everyone. We're trying to sell it to very specific people with specific
yeah,
tastes who are like us. And I
yeah.
think that connection is stronger because of that. Because if you pick up What's the Furthest Place from Here, Volume 1, and it makes sense to you, I think we probably have a lot in common as people. I think we probably care about a lot of the same things and
Yeah.
like the same things. And I think there's something really wonderful about getting to do that. Yeah.
All right. In your mind, because you'll probably know where I'm going with this. In your mind, are you still very young? I think the job that we do now, the creative business that we're in, I sell them, you make them.
Yeah.
For me, it keeps me young. I think for you,
Uh,
it's the same.
yeah, I think so.
Eh,
It's funny because I still love, I grew up in New York City, and I
yeah,
run into people I grew up with sometimes, and they're often you know investment bankers, or they
yeah,
work in
yeah.
finance, and the thing that people say to me all the time is like, wow, you're still into the exact same stuff you were into when we were kids. Where I'm like,
True.
I love comic books, and I love punk rock records, and I love like weird indie movies, and I love, my favorite meal is like a cheeseburger you eat on the street. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm still that person. I love, like, just getting in a car and driving somewhere and going on a trip and having an adventure. And so, yeah, I think I am still like, I don't know if the comics keeps you young at heart, or I like comics because I'm going to be young at heart. I don't know which
yeah.
comes first, but yeah, I still, I stay up until 4 in the morning reading comics every night. Like,
There we go.
that's what I do.
But on the other hand, what I'm trying to say here is we grew up with movies and comics where sidekicks or protagonists are teenagers, are young,
Sure, yeah.
are kids, and in four kids walk into a bank. What's the furthest place from here?
Yeah.
We can never go home. Uh, the
They're young.
protagonists are young.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think there's something really magical about telling stories about that age. I think that's when you start to discover the world and figure out how the world works for yourself. I don't think there's another point in your life. I think there are a lot of points in a life, in a person's life, that are worth exploring. But for me, a thing I find very exciting is discovering how the world works for yourself for the first time. I love that. I love the idea of not just taking what you've been told about the world,
yeah,
but actually testing it and actually finding out for yourself how, what's true and what isn't, and what's real, and how you fit into the world. And that,
yeah.
for me as a kid, like when I was 16, I, took 3 months off of high school, and a band came to town, and they needed someone to drive with them and sell their t-shirts and tune their guitars. And I didn't know them, and I said, yeah. And I traveled the whole United States for 3 months, and slept in on strangers' floors, and like, that to me is like a very pivotal moment in my life of discovering the world and who I am, and leaving my comfort zone. And so that's something I come back to a lot, of trying to
Yeah.
explore.
I
um
think I think I recently had a discussion with somebody also that life experience changes you when you're in between, yeah, like let's say in between 10 when you realize you're doing stuff
uh-huh.
and 30 if you experience stuff between in those 20 years, it changes you much more than past 30. Like we said in the beginning,
Yeah,
you became a comic book writer in your 30s, you wouldn't be that in your 20s because you were still developing yourself. I think that's probably, I'm not gonna tell you how you came by it, but I think that's a good starting point, that your protagonists are young, because you
Yeah.
can change them, you can mold them as a writer, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah. And I think, I think there's a lot of everything when you're young. There are so many things that are just feel so important, that they have
Yeah,
a heightened importance. Your romance feels like your first real love is such an important thing, and the first time you think about dying is such a major moment, and all these things are firsts, and
yeah,
that's something that you want to capture in fiction, is people dealing with things they've never dealt with before. And it's such a I think doing it with young characters. I mean, I'm doing a bunch of books now that are not about I'm working on a bunch of new stuff that's not about very young people, but
yeah. Okay.
I think it's very fun to it's just such an age of discovery, and it's such an age of exploration, that I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an amazing place to tell stories, and I feel like I still have a lot to say about that time in my life.
Yeah, but it's also always very interesting. Same with superheroes. If you get like for instance, Batman's son, when we saw him being an adult, it's always interesting to see how somebody became somebody totally
Yes.
different. And that's the thing with those ages. You can see where it goes to, and makes it really interesting as a writer, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
I think there's so much to explore, and I think I think you'll see it in all sorts of different. I think comics really loves it because comics is a medium that feels
yeah,
young. You feel youth
yeah.
comes out of comics, and I love that about it.
Then we'll use this to go to what's the furthest place from here. We're looking forward to the second volume coming
Yeah.
out. In a nutshell, it's you've done some world building where
Uh-huh.
we're actually in the future. Something has happened to the world, but I'm not quite sure what.
Sure.
Do you have an idea what happened?
I do. We know exactly what happened. The book is an interesting experiment for me and Tyler, because we wanted to do a bunch of stuff that we'd never done before. We wanted to
Yeah,
do an ongoing series. We wanted to do a book about a big ensemble cast, and we wanted to do a post-apocalyptic thing, a
yeah,
dystopian thing, have some horror elements. We wanted to do a bunch of stuff, but one of the things that I was very excited about was exploring this sort of post-apocalyptic dystopian world.
yeah,
And very early on, I mean, obviously we're big fans of stuff like, Twin Peaks or Lost, or,
yeah,
Cormac McCarthy's The Road, like these books where the world has been reshaped. And we're doing it from the point of view, it's a world without adults, it's just
yeah,
children.
yeah,
That's all that's left. And they don't um I realized early on that there's a beautiful thing of, like, if the world ended as we know it, how long before we would forget how it ended? How long before
yeah,
that story would just be lost to different people's narratives and different people's tales and versions and religions, and all these things would erase the actual knowledge of how it ended? But also, we're dealing with children, and they don't know what the world was like before this. And so
yeah,
it's all ancient history for them, what the world was like. So it's not that important to them. So how the world ended and why the world ended is something we know, and something we are going to explore, and you'll get more pieces of as the series goes. But it's not in the central premise of the book, because we wanted you to feel with the characters that they're learning about the world as you learn about the world.
yeah. There was also a decision made. The first volume, it was quite a hefty one, and I
Yes.
think the second you told in our in your communication to to us as retailers, it's also going to be quite a tome, because they collect 8 issues each.
No,
Or no,
it's well, well, it's
there's a
about it
part missing
reads.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it reads like 8 issues. So
Okay.
we make the book, um
Bigger.
standard comics are 20, 22 pages. Um you make some decisions on that when you're making a book, of things to cut and things to rush through. And early on in the book, we were like, let's not do that. Let's just make the book the size it needs to be. And
Yeah.
um And so, the first issue of the book is over 60 pages. The second issue is over 50 pages. So the first volume is 6 issues, but it's 270 pages, which, like, you know, at Marvel is 3 trades. It's one volume.
Yeah.
And the second volume is only 4 issues, but they're long, so it's 160 pages. It's still, if a Marvel comic is 20 pages long, it's the equivalent of 8 comics, but it's 4 for us.
Yeah.
But we're also, yeah, like you said, there's the first volume is the first 6 issues, and the second volume is issues 10 through 13. Issues 7, 8, and 9 are these flashback issues that will be collected eventually.
Yeah.
But we wanted to change. We're always trying to experiment and push things, so we wanted to change what the reading
Order.
experience. Yeah, if you read it in trade, it's a different experience. You'll have different information at different points, and we're playing with that idea of, like, the people who read it in comics know things about this story that these people who read it in the collected editions don't, and what does that do for that? And I think I have a theory on which is a better way to read it, and I think Tyler thinks the opposite. But we're both, you could do both. And obviously, if you pick up volume 1 and volume 2 and you like it, you can go buy issue 7, find
Sure.
issue 7, 8, and 9 in a comic shop and grab them, or they'll be in volume 4.
It happens. It happens in our shop because we're in Belgium. We don't translate much because our language Dutch isn't that big. We're just the Netherlands and Belgium and a bit in South Africa, so not much gets translated. So we read in English, and people always go back and forward. We've got people who start in issues and follow up in trades, and other way around. Because actually, most of them read in trades because we're used to that. We're not used to monthly comics. In Belgium, we have a big comic book culture, but we read three monthly. So that's a thing for us. But I've had it in past years when something comes out in a trade. Yeah, sometimes how it comes out, it makes a huge difference in the experience of the comic. Yeah. How for I suppose with DC you don't get to pick your artists, but for this you've gotten Tyler Boss, and for Four Kids Walk Into a Bank, or for We Can Never Go Home, you've got other artists. I know
Tyler drew Four Kids Walking to a Bank, and he's actually he was the colorist on We Can Never Go Home. He didn't draw it.
There we go. Because that was my question. How did you find him?
Tyler and me used to work in a comic book store together. We both worked in a comic shop in New York City. And Tyler was in college at the time. He was in art school at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And he was studying under David Mazzucchelli and Klaus Janson and all these masters. He was learning to make comics, and I was trying to make comics professionally and was writing stuff. And so we would talk about comics all the time. And I told him early on, I said, I have this idea for a story, and it was Four Kids Walk Into a Bank. And he just was fell in love with it. And we kept talking about it. And then he came to me one day and he said, I have to do a senior project. I have to draw a comic for school. Would you want to write Four Kids Walk Into a Bank issue 1 from, it wasn't called that then, but he said, would you want to write the first issue? And I would draw it for my class, for David Mazzucchelli to read. And I said, yeah. And so that's actually how we started working together, was that I wrote his senior project in art school, and we just loved it and decided to, we showed it to some publishers and they wanted to publish it. And we ended up having it at Black Mask. And I mean, I was the witness at his wedding. We were very close friends and now, but we met working together in a comic shop in New York.
All right. You hear that lots of times, that an artist, that a writer and an artist, that you've got some duos in the business. I think probably you mentioned it, you can't draw. Is it because he can think what you have, he can see what you have in your head? Is it something like that?
Yeah, I think the thing about me and Tyler is that creatively, I think we're like 80% the same person. We have a lot of the same influences. We like the same bands. We like the same movies. We like the same comics a lot, and then 20% is so wildly different. There's every once in a while there's something that I'm like, you have to read this or you have to watch this movie, and he'll do it, or he says the same thing to me and I'll be like, I hated it. And he'll be like, I hated that. And that, I think, is the beauty of what we do, because there's very little, so much of the stuff we do we agree on, and then there's wild differences. There's just these incredible differences in minor things that end up mattering so much. So he's always doing what I see in my head, but making it better and surprising me when I need to be surprised, and doing things in a different way. And I think that's the beauty of a good creative relationship, is like, you work together really well, but you can still surprise each other, and you can still draw from different places. And so yeah, I mean, we love working together, and we're already talking about what we're doing after What's the First Place from here, even though we have a long road ahead of us still.
Do you have a long list with ideas? Is that something, for instance, now the Furthest Place from here, the second volume is coming out. The project has been going on now for 2 or 3 years, I suppose.
Yeah, like 2 years. We have, so we have planned out, I mean, we're working on issue 15 now. Issue 14, which is the first volume after the first issue after the trade, will be out the month after. So the volume 2 comes out in August, issue 14 comes out in September, and then that will start what will be the third volume. And then we have we have a bunch of issues after that. We know the whole story. We have the whole story planned out, and we know what it is. But then there's a bunch of things we want to do after, a bunch of different projects. We're actually doing a book on the side.
Okay.
Tyler's writing a book that a different artist is drawing that's really good, that I love and I'm very excited about, and I'm writing some things he's not drawing. But then we're co-writing a book together that another artist is going to draw, and then we have another book that we're going to be doing right after For This Place. So we're just always coming up with stuff.
So are you a busy man? Because this sounds like you have, for the moment, you've got what's the First Place from here on the stands and ongoing. You're doing the Joker series, which is continuing in September, I suppose.
Yep.
You're doing the Red Hood. You did something with Wildcats.
I'm doing Wildcats, is still coming out. And then I'm working on 3 other books that aren't announced.
What does your average day look like?
I write about 16 hours a day, or I work 16 hours a day. It's not all writing, but I'm working about 16 hours a day. Yeah, I don't 7 days a week.
And how? Wow. And can I? And that working, is it physically at the computer, or are you just saying like, no, I'm in my head, I'm working 16 hours a day?
No, it's I'm at the computer probably 12 hours a day, 12 or 13. There's a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. There's a lot of between getting to do interviews, which I really love and it's very fun, but also awesome. I have calls with editorial at DC and meetings with them, and talking to their press department and coordinating. But also there's like film and TV stuff, for not now because the film industry is on strike. Which we're very supportive of and rooting for them. But when that stuff's not happening, there's a lot of meetings about, there's a 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank movie that's in production. We're going to announce something about What's the Furthest Place from here, coming out for film and TV soon. So like there's a lot of meetings for that, but no, mostly I'm at the computer writing or outlining or doing lettering passes and approving art and things like that.
You don't have to go into details with that, but is there a big difference between what's happening now in the movie industry opposite to the comic book industry? Is how you get treated as an employee or as an independent creator? Is it correct or not? It's hard. I don't know how to put it into a right question, but you can feel what I'm asking, I suppose.
It's funny. At Marvel and DC, I'm an employee, and they they do their best. The great editors, and at DC, I love my editors, and they're the best I've ever worked with. And there are a lot of editors at Marvel I love. They do their best to value, but you never lose sight of the fact that you're one tiny piece in a big
Yeah, of
machine.
course.
And you can't just do whatever you want. With the film and TV stuff, obviously with our own stuff, it's different because we don't really work for anyone. Image publishes us, and but they're really it's more of a partnership, and Image is its own entity. And but the film and TV thing is interesting because they have to be nice to you. They have to really you made the thing that they want to make. You made the thing that they, so like, we're on the Four Kids Walking to a Bank movie, me and Tyler are producers on the movie. Like, we get to read the scripts, talk about casting, all those things. But at the same time, you always know that, like, in the back, they're very nice, everyone is great, and we love them, but also I'm just very aware that I'm like, well, they do make movies without people like me involved, so I have to sort of always be like, thank you for letting me be here, even though they all treat you like you're so important and great. I'm like, you could do this without me. I know you don't, now that you own the comic, you can do whatever you want. You don't need my input. But they're very nice and are always looking for input, which I appreciate. And
but I can assume there's a huge difference between you and, I'm not sure if I put this correctly, the screenwriter, the guy who has to write it for to translate it to moving pictures, because he's just that cog, and they just try to. I think that's why what the whole strike is about. They try to put him into
I mean, it's very different. The screenwriters are I've had a couple things adapted that nothing's ever been made, but I've had the screenwriters come in and adapt things. And it's always funny because, like, we're both writers, we're all writers, so like but their job is very different than what I do. And I'm also like, they were hired to make something that I was like, I'm sort of done with my part of it, and so you don't want to step on their toes. And I have an enormous amount of respect for the screenwriters and what they do, but it's a hard job. Adapting things is really hard, and I've been very fortunate to have some amazing screenwriters working on my stuff. But it's a very different experience, my experience on there.
I suppose so. When we talked about how your career started, you didn't put it into detail, because this is actually, you're doing stuff that I'm not a writer, but readers, they dream about it. They like, oh, I would love to write a comic at DC, or I would love to write a comic at Marvel. How was it easy to get there? Was it easy to get into a publisher as Marvel or DC? Because those are the two biggest comic book publishers in the world. That's
No, it's not easy at all. I spent years. I had the benefit of being in New York, and at the time, DC was in New York, and Marvel is still in New York. And so again, it's like the thing we talked about of having life experience. I worked in the music industry, so like, I understand networking. I understand, doing publicity and promotion, because I worked on those things. And so I spent a lot of years. I spent 2 or 3 years pitching things to small publishers, trying to get things out there, and I was not getting any traction. And luckily, Black Mask came along, and I knew some people who knew them, and we connected, and they liked what I was doing. And as soon as I got that stuff, I could start sending it to Marvel and DC and being like, I have an actual comic coming out. Like, here's my resume. And I was very fortunate to live in New York, and I had friends in common who were Marvel and DC creators and Marvel and DC editors, and I would meet them and run into them. The comic shop I shop at, a lot of Marvel staff shopped at that shop, so I would literally be in the store picking up my books every week, and I would see, the story I always tell is I wrote a Rocket Raccoon book, and the way I got that book, I was in the comic shop buying my books for the week. And Jordan White, who's a Marvel editor now, he's the head of the X-Men group, came in, and I'd met him before, and I was like, hey, Jordan, Matt Rosenberg, nice to meet you. And he was like, oh, he's like, we're having a creative summit. There's a bunch of writers here. Do you know these guys? And behind him was Cullen Bunn, Jeff Lemire, and Jerry Duggan. And I didn't know Cullen or Jeff really, but I knew Jerry. and I talked to them for a little bit, and then Jerry was like, "Come out and get drinks with us." And I was like, "Oh no, I don't want to interfere." And Jerry like leaned in and he was like, "You want to come? Like come." And so
Yeah.
I went and hung out with them. And the next morning, Jordan called me and said, "Hey, this just landed on my desk. I need to put together a Rocket Raccoon book. Do you have any interest in doing it?" And it was that lucky coincidence. It's not. I wish that I had better advice for people other than like be in New York and know
Yeah.
people. But I mean, I think there's a lot of ways in. But yeah, no, I was a lot of working and networking and putting out the work and
And you got
uh
rewarded.
yeah, it pays off. It doesn't always, it doesn't for everyone, and I'm very lucky, and I know that
Yeah.
every day. Um,
That's
yeah, but
fair.
I love to do it. So
Yeah, but it's awesome that for me it's if I can give you a compliment, for me it's awesome to talk to somebody who did like Uncanny X-Men.
Mhm.
You did so many great titles. You did the
Thank you.
Punisher, which was excellent by the way, and putting him into the War Machine suit was also really a really fun arc. It's
Thank you.
it's cool to talk to somebody like you.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
well, what's the furthest place from here? The second volume is coming out. I think it's going to be for. I wasn't sure. I did some bad. I didn't research that good enough.
I think it's that
Uh,
last week in August.
let's see here. The 23rd. The last week, the last full week of August.
Yeah.
Um, you said there's more in the pipeline.
Yes.
You'll probably can't explain that too much. Is it going to be wildly different? Probably
It, it, it
yes.
the next arc is by the end of the next arc is a wildly different book. Yeah.
Yeah.
It becomes something and then it'll become something else. So the next you'll start to see issue 14,
Yeah.
we ease you in, and by issue 16 we're going to have a lot of people freaking out and asking us what's going on because it's going to be very different.
All
There's
right.
some big revelations coming. It's actually the stuff that me and Tyler have been most excited about since we started the book. Like these moments are the big moments that we've always been aiming to tell. So that's very exciting for us to finally get those out. We're like very excited and nervous about it.
All right. And further down the road in the future, well, as other titles, your other ideas,
Mhm.
do you already have something getting into getting coming closer up?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have a new book at DC that we'll be announcing, I think, at New York Comic Con in October.
All right.
Um, and then
Is it
I'm
is
talking.
it is it a character or an event?
It's more event like.
All right.
Uh, and I'm talking to them about some character stuff, but also I've been working on a lot of my own stuff,
Yeah.
and so I'm working on quite a few independent books
Yeah.
that are coming together now. And I'm very excited. I have the first two issues of a book with Stefano Landini, who worked on some of my Punisher stuff, but has been doing. He did some Black Panther at Marvel and some X-Men. He's amazing, and personally, I think it's the best work of his career. I think when people
Well,
see this book, he's going to be a superstar. But it's a very fun thing that the first two issues are done, and we're working on the third issue now, and so we'll be announcing that before long. And then I'm doing a book with Andy McDonald, who I wrote Multiple Man. I made Multiple Man with
yeah.
at
Yeah.
Marvel, and we're doing a very weird sci-fi book that's very funny and odd, and
But I
I
think
literally
I think
yeah
his style lends to that because Multiple Man was a bit of the same thing what you're
yeah
describing right now.
yeah. Andy is an amazing artist, and he can do these big crazy huge things, and he understands scale in a comic very well. I think a lot of superhero artists are used to like the close-up action, and Andy
Yeah.
can pull the camera back and make something that feels big and epic. But he's also, yeah, he can do funny and quirky really well, and so we're really excited. He just finished the first issue of the book, and I just sent him the second issue right before this call, so he's going to be reading the second issue script today. So both of those will be coming next year. Actually, I have a newsletter where we sort of talk about stuff
Yeah.
that's in
Yeah. Yeah.
development and stuff, and if
I
people care,
I think that's
yeah,
the Substack
yes,
newsletter. That's yeah. All
yeah.
right.
But some of the books we're making, we're going to be like doing behind the scenes and developing in the newsletter, so you can see it if you care about that stuff. If you don't,
it'll come out in print probably.
They're going to come out on bookshelves for sure. But if you want to know, like, what does the art process look like, what does my script look like, where did the idea come from, we're going to talk about all that stuff in the newsletter, which I'm very excited about, because a lot of people, there's so many comics fans who love comics and don't quite understand how they're made, and everyone makes them differently. But I get asked so often, like, how do you make this? How did this idea come about? How does the art work? How does all these things? And so we're going to be going over all of that in the newsletter, which is very cool.
Those are always the hard questions, but where you get your ideas and such. We just talked about it. That's your life experience. But for you, do you still find the time to read other comics?
Oh yeah, I read. I literally read every single night. I read comics every single day.
I know
read
the
about
feeling. That's
I read. I read. I have to read a lot of DC stuff for work.
Of course.
But I like everything, and so I'm always jumping around and reading. Just like, it seems crazy when I post, like, I'm like, oh, I was reading this and I'm reading this, and like, I'm reading the manga I Am a Hero, and then I'm reading the new, I mean, I don't even know, I could look over and see what I'm reading.
Everybody has a pile, and you have to choose one.
and you're just like, oh, I don't know why I grabbed this one, I don't know what that, but I'm always just reading. I read about a trade paperback or a graphic novel every 2 days. So
for me, it's actually we're working during the day. I can't sleep if I haven't read a comic.
Same.
That's the place to read a comic, is in your bed. It's 100%. Really weird to say that, but that makes you sleepy, not in a bad way. But if I can't turn a page anymore, then it's time to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. I also because my brain is always working.
Yeah,
I'm always like, I have this energy. If I don't read a comic, I end up having nightmares about my work. I have these stress nightmares, and so if I don't, like, I have to read comics before in bed, because otherwise I wake up and I'm like, I got to get back to work.
Do you have as because you've worked in a comic book shop and now you're working in the business of creating comics, do you have your favorites yourself as writer?
I mean, I have a ton of favorites.
Is it hard because now they're your colleagues? Was it different before?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I remember when I got to when I became exclusive at Marvel, and they had me at my first, like, they have a writers summit where, like, all the exclusive writers got together, and I'm sitting at a table, and Brian Bendis is there, and Mark Waid is there, and Jason Aaron is there, and Ta-Nehisi Coates, and they're telling you what they're going to do in their books for the next 2 years. And I was like, I kind of don't want to know. Like, I want to read it as a fan and be surprised. I don't want to hear how the story ends. I want to be surprised. But no, I've been very lucky in that a lot of my favorite writers are actually, like, really great people and they've been so kind to me. So, like, I'm a huge Brian Bendis fan. I'm a huge Brian K. Vaughan fan. Ed Brubaker, Jeff Lemire, Jason Aaron, like all of those people. And then I love, like, I'm a huge Alan Moore fan, but like, I love Dan Clowes, Seth. I'm a big fan of Seth's stuff, and Chris Ware and Adrian Tomine and people like that. And
that's quite the eclectic bunch you just mentioned. They're all different kinds of styles.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I try and read everything. I don't just watch. It's funny because I said to someone once where they were like, "You read so much different stuff," and I'm like, "Well, you don't just watch superhero movies, do you?" And then I realized a lot of people do just watch superhero movies, and I was like, "No, I don't know. Like, I love
a broad horizon or something. You have to that works always.
I mean, I was a big fan of mini comics and self-published stuff coming up. So, like, people like Sammy Harcum and people like that who are doing, just great, a lot of the Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly stuff. Like, that was what kept me excited in comics for a long time. The Hernandez brothers are like, I wouldn't be making comics if it wasn't for Love and Rockets. So, I try and read everything.
Yeah, I know the feeling. When I took Mechanic over, I was mainly a European comic book fan,
Uh-huh.
and I was reading Marvel a lot. But
Sure.
to have the fortune to be at the source and to broaden your horizon with Image Comics out of the blue, I
Hmm.
didn't hear about those things before. It really, yeah, it changes something in you. It makes you
Yeah.
you may it sounds stupid, but suddenly you feel smarter just because you know more.
Sure.
It's a
Yeah,
really
and
great
I
experience.
think your brain. I think people who don't do that don't experience a broad variety of storytelling
Mm,
and stories and different types of art are I don't think they realize it, but you're starving your brain. Like my favorite food is hamburgers. I love hamburgers, but you don't eat hamburgers 7 days a week because
no,
you need to eat all these other things, and it makes you appreciate it more. Like I love a superhero comic. I love, you know, James Tynion's work. I love Donny Cates's work. I love Scott Snyder and Brian Bendis and
yeah.
all these people who do amazing work. But like I love
Suddenly a Scott McCloud walks by, or
oh yeah, yeah,
or
we
Craig
love
Thompson, or
yeah, yeah. I love Tezuka. You have
yeah.
to read,
There you go.
you have to read some Tezuka. You have to read Otomo. You have to read all these people. You have to read Hergé and like all these amazing comics creators and
Now,
uh
on the other hand, it's because we were talking about broaden your horizon. That's probably because it's our job. It's your
sure.
job to be creative and to think about everybody.
Yeah.
You want to reach a certain audience, but you also want to sometimes, especially with superhero comics, you want to reach a broad audience,
Yeah.
and you have to think about people who aren't you.
Yeah.
And sometimes for me, sometimes I sell comics that I don't like, but I
Sure.
know they are popular. You have to turn over a certain switch in your head. That's like, it's not because I don't think it's good, it's not good.
Yeah.
It's probably good, but
Yeah.
other people like it. So
Yeah. I mean, I say this all the time to young writers. I say don't just read the stuff you love.
yeah,
Study things you don't like too. Like read a comic that you think you wouldn't like, and even if you hated it, study it. You can learn a lot from things you hate. It's very easy to say, why didn't I like something? And I tend to like a lot more stuff, but I love exactly the same as you. When I worked in a comic shop, I read so much to try and be able to talk about it and
yeah,
sell things and have good conversations with customers. But as a creator, also, it's just like, what are the interesting ideas that Chainsaw Man is doing
yeah,
in comics that I can learn from? Or how can I learn from, what can I learn from a Tintin comic? And, like in Four Kids Walk Into a Bank, like, we owe as much in that book to, we love the crime stuff, and there's a lot of Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, David Lapham,
yeah,
but there's a lot of, Jacques Tardy and Hugo Pratt and things like that, where we're just really like, uh there's a lot of Tintin influence in that book.
yeah,
We're trying to study everything and be like, all of these things are tools. Every culture develops a different set of tools and a different language for comics. And like, you're doing yourself a disservice as a creator and a fan if you're not
yeah.
taking all of that in some level.
Yeah, and learning to think outside of the box that is your head.
Yeah, for
Learning
sure.
to approach certain things that you haven't visualized yourself, and
Yeah,
reading something else probably gives you an idea. It's the same like you say with food, with that hamburgers. Uh,
yeah,
a chef a chef goes and eats in other places also to become aware of, "Ah, I haven't
for
thought
sure.
about that for like that." So
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Um, well, it was nice to have a look inside of your head, Matthew.
Thanks.
And it's always nice. I realize this now, and I realize this. I've been doing this more and more. I talked a couple of months ago with Ram, and
Oh yeah.
a month ago we had Kelly Jones here. Um,
Oh, that's amazing.
but as a writer for artists, it's something else because they're just drawing. But as a writer, I think writers are, as you said, are all kind people, because you can read it in their stories that they are kind people. Otherwise, they can't tell you stories, I
Yeah, I mean,
suppose.
I think a big part of writing is empathy, is
Yeah,
about being able to care about other people and characters and put yourself in other positions. And you know, I'm sure there are definitely some great writers who are mean people, but I think by and large, it's a group of people who at least understand and are good at being empathetic and
Oh,
thinking about what it's like to be someone else. And that's a big part of it.
that sounds logical, because if somebody isn't a kind person, he probably sees everybody as unkind people, and his protagonists and everybody, all the characters in his story or her
Sure.
story, of their story, are probably unkind.
Yeah.
That's
Which, you
yeah.
know, there are some great stories about unkind people, but for the most part, I feel like writers as a group are people who can be. I mean, they're weird. A lot of them are very weird,
But
but
that's good.
that's okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all right. But I think it's a very kind group of people for the most part, for sure.
Well, I was fortunate enough to discover that you're a very kind person, and thank you very much for your time. It was awesome.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everyone at the shop who picks up the stuff. I
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
everybody, this was Matthew Rosenberg. What's the furthest place from here? Volume 2 is coming out at the 23rd. I probably this podcast is coming out a week before, something like that. So we'll have a stack of them coming in. I'm gonna peek here for a moment. The first stack of issues that I've coming in are 20, so there'll be a huge pile
Awesome.
lying there. You're lying in the middle shelf, and those are my personal
Oh,
the recommendations of the
oh,
store themselves. So
well, thank you.
that's gonna be cool. And of course, there's Joker Night Terror second issue came out 2 weeks ago. Then from now,
Oh,
and we're looking forward to Wildcats. You're doing the Joker series is continuing starting in
yep.
September. So look for Matthew Rosenberg on all the covers. Matthew, thank you very much. It was a
Thanks so
joy.
much.
And everybody, thanks you for listening or viewing, and see you next time. Bye.